Okay, next question, if you'll stay there. You continually use fossils as proof of evolution. Can you explain why we have tons of fossils of the organisms from which we evolved, and also tons of fossils to which what they evolved to? Let me try that again. Can you explain why we have tons of fossils of the organisms from which we evolved, and also tons of fossils of the organisms to which we evolved, I believe, but no fossils at all of intermediate organisms that must have existed over the long time span it takes to evolve? Example, ape, to man, many fossils, man exists, but no intermediate. Why?
Intermediates do exist between our ancestors, which were not apes. We share an ancestor with apes, but apes are not our ancestor. And we have fossil evidence for many intermediates between that ancestor and us. We don't have intermediates between apes and ourselves because there would be none, because they are not our ancestors.
I would have to say, of course, that's wishful thinking. There are no intermediate species at all. They did not exist. It's not like we're looking for missing links. The entire chain is missing. It did not happen. Similarities in structures between us and the apes or an ape-like so-called ancestor, similarities in body structure are certainly no proof of evolution. That's proof of an intelligent creator who used the same design over and over. The Honda Civic and the Honda Accord and the Honda Prelude have similarities, not because they all evolved from a Chevy, but because they all came from the mind of the same designer. So similarity is just as much proof of a common designer as it would be of a common ancestor. It is really not part of the argument. My colleague has mentioned natural selection several times. Natural selection certainly is also no help for evolution. Natural selection is just as much proof for creation as it is for evolution. Natural selection doesn't tell you how the animal got there. It just tells you which one survives. That would be proof just as much that an intelligent creator gave his creation the ability to produce a variety of offspring so that some would survive in any given environment. So natural selection is really not part of the argument at all. It's just as much evidence for creation as it is for evolution. It really has no bearing on the subject.
Okay, I'm going to throw you a general question that I have about 5 or 6 versions of. In effect, I'll read you one, but I'll give you the general question. We believe what we can prove. If we could or had the ability to prove that God exists, every person on the earth would have faith in the same God. And what I have 5 or 6 copies of is, how do you prove that there is a God?
Oh, I certainly couldn't prove that. I could demonstrate it. I could give some evidences. But change lives would be one. He certainly has changed my life 24 years ago when I accepted Christ as my Savior. Been a mountainous change since then. But I would say asking for proof of something like that, I could, of course, turn the question around and say, give me some proof, show me what gravity is. Nobody knows what it is. We know what it does. We don't know what it is. You can't give me a jar of gravity, and you certainly can't paint it red. What is gravity? What is light? What is magnetism? There are many fundamental forces that we use all the time, but have never seen and have no idea what they are. I have never seen God. I did not see a 600-foot Jesus, and I don't think Oral did either. But if he did, he'd still be running. So I'm certainly not one of those kind, but I think it is something I take by faith. I've never been to Japan, never been there, but I have a Casio watch. I'm sure it's made in Japan, and I would guarantee there's a Japanese watchmaker over there, even though I've never seen it. I, by faith, would accept that. That's no problem. I see the results. I see the creation, me and you and the world, and there has to be a creator. There is design that indicates a designer. That argument has never been successfully answered by the evolutionists. Design demands a designer. They spend millions of dollars putting telescopes up to look for intelligent signals from outer space because they know that would prove there's intelligent life out there. And yet there are signals bombarding us all the time. It's just obvious what was created and what was not. I could get a bag of objects and put rocks and coins and watches and sticks in there and have you reach in and pull one out and tell me. A 5-year-old could tell you whether it was man-made or a naturally occurring object. And looking at the human body, looking at anatomy, looking at the structure of one paramecium, which is more complex than the entire space shuttle, you would have to say this was designed. The genetic code, the DNA code, had to be designed. Dropping letters out of a box does not form Webster's dictionary. I don't care how many billions of years you do it, the letters would wear out before you'd form the dictionary, and the genetic code is far too complex to ever have arisen by chance. So as far as I got off the question, proving the existence of God, I wouldn't attempt to. I would say that's something you're going to have to take on faith, just like the evolutionist takes on faith that there is a mysterious motivating force driving toward more complexity by pouring energy in. Adding energy to a closed system doesn't improve order. You can run a tornado through a junkyard and you'll never assemble a Boeing 747. Increased energy input. Hurricane Andrew did not assemble any buildings down in southern Florida, even though it tore up several lumber yards.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to go on if we may. Sorry to cut you off, but I'm kind of looking at a 5-minute clock here. Do you wish to handle how do we prove the existence of God, or perhaps something close?
I would refer to my opening remarks, and I keep my religion as one part of my life, and my science as another part. My science I subject to evidence and material observations. My faith is just that. It is part of the non-material world, and it is answerable with questions directed by faith.
Thank you. Dr. Richardson first here. I'm going to throw you, paraphrasing what I've gotten 5 or 6 copies of here. Is there anything that evolutionists know for sure, not just, quotation marks, theory, and a number of the others have to do with how does a scientist define theory versus how does a creationist define theory?
Well, theory is defined as a fact in science, a fact based on empirical evidence. And a creationist, I believe, adds religious faith to that equation, and I would find that an inappropriate use of that. Now, is there anything that evolutionists know for sure? Is that the question?
Correct.
Again, I get my hackles up whenever I hear prove. With respect to biology, we weren't listening in the beginning when I talked about proofs being confined to the sciences of physics and chemistry. So please, listen a little bit so we don't have to do this. So does evolution have evidence? Is there evidence of evolution? We have the fossil record. We have the current study of animal behavior, where if we ask questions in an evolutionary framework, we have predictive power in answering those questions. We have the science of ecology. We have subsciences. All of the subsciences of biology provide evidence for evolution and use evolution to give it predictive power. So yes, we have more than you can imagine. Volumes and volumes. If I brought my library and lined it up here next to Dr. Hovine's library, just the books that I read teaching an evolution course this term, we fill the Winona Library is stacks and stacks of books on evolution. These are not speculation. They are empirical evidence upon empirical evidence. The entire fossil record, the entire subsciences of ecology, animal behavior, taxonomy, all of the subsciences, physiology, anatomy. Biology is full of empirical evidence for evolution.
Dr. Hovind?
Listing all the sciences available certainly didn't offer any empirical evidence. To say that it exists, and I'd like to see it, I'll be reasonable and rational. I've heard many evolutionists say, well, we have lots of evidence, but nobody's ever brought it forth. Many scientists who believe strongly in evolution will say, we have no empirical evidence, but we believe it strongly because the only other alternative is creation, and that clearly is unthinkable. All the sciences that Dr. Richardson named were started by creationists who were looking for design and order in this universe. Nearly all of the early scientists in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s were creation scientists. Now, some were wrong in some of their theories. I understand that, okay? And we need to always allow for that possibility that we may be wrong and be willing to change and alter what we believe in light of the facts. As I mentioned earlier, if it could be proven the universe was not billions of years old, as I believe it clearly can be proven, then evolution would have to modify their theory to fit within the time work of 8 to 10,000 years maximum, which of course could not happen. So I would say there is, am I answering the question right? What? Read it to me one more time. If you would, please.
If I have the right question. Is there anything that evolutionists know for sure, not just theory?
No, there is not. Dr. Ropp, I believe, is the curator at the museum in British Museum of Natural History, the largest fossil collection in the world, asked that question to the Chicago symposium of famous evolutionists from all over the place. He said, do any of you know anything for sure about evolution? Long period of silence. Finally, one man stood up and he said, I know one thing for sure. We shouldn't teach it in high school. That was his result. No, there has never been any empirical evidence offered for evolution. They always claim they have it. I would love to see it. And if you read a whole library full of books this quarter, I read a lot, but I can't go that far. I try to read a lot, and I'm willing to read anything by anybody. I'm willing to look at all the evidence from both sides, and I have never seen any empirical testable evidence. That's why on the back of my business card, I offer $10,000 for anybody with any empirical evidence, a legitimate standing offer of 4 years now. If you've got some evidence, please show it to me. Let's put it to the test. Let's show me life evolving from non-life. Let's do it in the laboratory. Miller certainly didn't. He made a few simple amino acids. That's building the building blocks. He didn't make a cell, certainly nothing that reproduces itself. We've never seen an animal change to any other kind of animal. It has never been observed in the fossil record, and it's not happening today. Chimpanzees today are still having babies, and they're still chimpanzees. Nothing changes.
Okay. I'm going to throw at you, Dr. Hovind, a series that I think are all related. And I'm not sure if I can summarize, so let me just quickly read these. They're all kind of the same question in my mind. If there is a creator and he or she created, why would the creator make something like an appendix, a human organ which is useless and even dangerous? Why are there certain useless anatomical parts of the body, such as the coccyx, the remnants of a tail, and useless muscles that are gradually disappearing? Isn't it true that 80 to 90% of our enzymes are also found in other animals? For example, pig insulin works in diabetic people. And isn't this evidence that we are biologically related? If human beings aren't related to apes, why do we have the muscles which gorillas and chimpanzees use to oppose their great toe and small toe? There's an anatomist here. They're called the opponents hallucis and the opponents digiti minimi. Sorry, it's not minimus, it's minimi. I happen to be an anatomist. Even though we can't make these motions, why is the bone and joint structure of our great toe like that of our thumb instead of like that of our other toes if we didn't evolve from animals which could oppose their great toes like chimpanzees and gorillas can? I think that's it.
That's it?
Did I do too many on you?
No.
I think the question is, why do we have evidence of things that would be evolutionarily remainders of things we don't use anymore?
Okay, I think the vestigial organ argument, of course, certainly does not prove evolution at all. That is, again, examples of losing something, not gaining something, which would be the opposite of evolution if they did exist. When the human anatomy was first being discussed and discovered back several hundred years ago, they had a list of 180 vestigial organs. The tailbone was one, the coccyx, the different muscles in the body, the appendix. I don't know of very many reputable doctors that would say there are any vestigial organs. To my knowledge, there's no such thing as a vestigial organ still on the list. It simply was a lack of our understanding. For years, they thought the pituitary gland was a vestigial organ, something we did not need, which certainly you do. The coccyx, the tailbone, is definitely not a vestigial organ. There are some definite uses for it. It holds a number of different muscles that are useful for different functions. Break yours sometime and try to sit down and you'll see. And again, losing a tail would be an example of a loss of information, not a gain. A tail would be a handy thing to have. So vestigial organs do not exist in the first place. And I was very disappointed that Dr. Richardson referred to vestigial organs in the embryonic stage. The ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny theory was disproven 50 years ago. The human baby never has gill slits. They are different folds of skin that develop into different parts of the respiratory and hearing tract. The baby never can breathe through them. Some of you have several chins. Some of you fat folks, you cannot breathe through any of them except the top one. The fact that the baby embryo looks like it has a tail, it simply isn't fully developed yet. The argument from ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is the justification for abortion. After all, it's just a fish or just an amphibian. The baby does not go through the stages of evolution during development. It is 100% human the instant it is conceived. And to terminate the life by an outsider from that moment on...
Okay, excuse me, we are off topic.
Okay, go ahead.
Dr. Richardson.
Embryonically, we do have gill slits. They are vestigial. By definition, vestigial is useless. So, of course, we don't breathe through them. They are remnants of our ancestry. The ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny has been disproven. We do not pass through our ancestral stages, but that has nothing to do with our continuing to show some of these vestigial organs because we are not subject to natural selection as strongly in the womb as we are once we come out of the womb. So when we're in the womb, we are protected, and there is not selection to get rid of some of these useless structures that we don't use. Vestigial, by definition, is non-usable, so of course you don't breathe through them in the womb. But pharyngeal gill slits do give rise to structures of the ear, structures of the jaw. Embryologically, they correspond very well to the pharyngeal gill slits of our ancestors. So we have many vestigial organs. Vestigial, by definition, is useless. So.
Okay, I didn't just happen to pick this one out. It addresses the same thing, and maybe you can just say, I already answered this, but it provides some information toward that. You mentioned that the pharyngeal gill slits are vestigial, but modern embryology has proved this wrong, as Dr. Ashley Montague, an anthropologist, stated, quote, the theory of recapitulation was destroyed in 1921 by Professor Walter Gerstang in a famous paper, since when no respectable biologist has ever used the theory of recapitulation because it was utterly unsound, created by a Nazi-like preacher named Haeckel. To whom do you go for your source of research on embryology? I see two questions in here. Is it true that no respectable biologist has ever used the theory of recapitulation? And to whom do you go for your source of research on embryology?
Okay, I go to my embryology classes and I go to my readings of embryology when I talk about embryological origins. And I see that I've confused people by using the pharyngeal gill slits as my example. I did not mean to imply that I adhere to this old ancient theory of ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny. Stephen Jay Gould wrote a book about this subject in which he very thoroughly took care of any vestigial doubts about ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny. So my source for, what was the other part of the question? Sorry, Ed.
Is it true that no respectable biologist has ever used the theory of recapitulation?
Well, it was respectable for a time until it was disproven. So I wouldn't slander historical biologists for using a theory that they didn't know any better about.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hovland.
Yes, Dr. Richardson in her opening comments was giving the sciences that support evolution, and she said developmental biology supports evolution because of vestigial organs, including gill slits and tails, while the baby is in the mother's womb. So she is using ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. We've got it on tape. It is still in the textbooks, that's for certain. I have nearly all the textbooks, and it is in there. They are still teaching in many of the textbooks. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. They will list evidences for evolution, and they will talk about embryonic development proving evolution. Similarities in a microscopic stage, of course, when the animal is smaller, it's tougher to see the differences, but it still doesn't prove they have a common ancestor. Similarities could easily prove a common creator. The idea that there are similarities in development and similarities in the adult stages, 2 bones in the wrist, does not prove a common ancestor. It proves a common creator. Both can argue that as their point, and it's a moot point. It's not part of the argument. Similarities have nothing to do with evolution or creation. Both are going to take that for evidence for their side.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we've completely covered this or not, but I'm going to come back to it. If you believe in creation, why go to the doctor? Either you believe or you don't. The laws of physics are always constant. Does this relate to, does faith in creationism relate to practice of medicine?
I would guess that question is for me. I definitely, okay, sure. I definitely believe in creation, and I certainly go to the doctor. I think the human body is extremely complex, and any complex mechanism can go bad. I worked at General Motors. I helped build trucks. I believe that General Motors builds trucks, but I'm certainly not against mechanics. They do break down. The belief in creation does not mean you can't. I don't understand any relation at all between belief in creation and not going to the doctor. I cannot see the logic in that. I'm sorry. Yes, I believe you ought to go to the doctor if you get sick. I have no problem with that.
I go to the doctor.
Okay.
Okay. You're next, or you're first up next then. Dr. Richardson, how does evolution explain development of the sexes and variety of species from one cell?
Development of the sexes. So they want to know about the origin of genders in reproduction.
How does evolution explain development of the sexes and variety of species from one cell?
Okay. Let's see, the theory of evolution takes us from simple cells to multiple cells, all of which undergo asexual reproduction. And when we get to the multicelled organisms, we see the origins of, some of the single-celled organisms that are further derived do exchange gametic information, which we would consider the role of sexual reproduction. So evolution deals with the evolution of sex by saying that sexual reproduction increases the chances of variation in your genotype. Okay, every time you reproduce, you produce gametes that are half of your genome, and when these combine, genetic recombination is possible, allowing further variation in your genome. And variation is the stuff of evolution. So sexual reproduction is a key to allowing variation, which allows evolution by natural selection. Was that pretty much?
I would say that was definitely begging the question. That explains that once it works, it's useful and it works good, but it doesn't explain how it got to be that way at all. How do you go from asexual to sexual reproduction? There is no good answer to that by evolution. Sexual reproduction is, of course, a very inefficient way to produce offspring. The chances of how many things would have to be right in order for sexual reproduction to work? It would be like your automobile. I could say, how many things have to be right for it to work? You would say, well, thousands. How many things have to be wrong for it not to work? Any one of thousands of things. And sexual reproduction is so complex, it could not have arisen piece by piece by chance. It had to be designed and created. And there is no good evolutionary explanation. all the different single-celled animals have both types, asexual and sexual reproduction. And the idea that to say that it's here, therefore it must have evolved, is certainly begging the question. Yes, I agree it's here, but that to me says it must have been created. So again, both are going to use that evidence. I think the creation, though it does involve an unseen creator, definitely takes a lot of faith. And evolution would take even more faith to say, well, it works, so it had to get here somehow.
Then I guess my next question for you, to begin with, why isn't the ocean floor as old as predicted? The formula distance equals rate times time says so. Why isn't the ocean floor as old as predicted? The formula distance equals rate times time says so. You can pass on these if you wish.
Yeah, I don't think that question is put together the way the person was intending it to be. The sediments in the ocean definitely indicate a young age for the ocean. There's not enough sediment down there to indicate millions of years of accumulation. That's why the continental drift theory is so important to the evolutionary theory, because they have to develop some way of getting rid of ocean sediments because it simply is not there. I live by the San Andreas Fault. I'm very familiar with the continental cracks in the place, and the Earth is shifting and twisting, but again, that does not prove it's been going on for millions of years. And similarities of shapes, Africa and South America would fit together. That does not prove they broke apart millions of years ago. I could say this building and the building across the street are oriented the same. That does not prove they broke apart and the blacktop oozed up between them. Similarity of shape is determined by the water level. If you raise the ocean 500 feet, Chicago becomes on the beach, and the whole Amazon jungle would be flooded, and that similarity of shape would disappear. So the ocean sediments are a real problem for the evolutionist. As far as the continents spreading, it may be that the Atlantic is getting wider. The only research that I'm familiar with that was done on that was the satellite where they bounced lasers from Europe and America for 8 years till the satellite finally fell out of parking orbit. They did not actually see any movement of the continents, so they attributed the maximum allowable error to atmospheric twinkle, 0.46 arc seconds, as the laser goes through the atmosphere, and said, well, they must have moved and we couldn't detect it. So there may be movement. I'm not saying there's not. But the idea of continental drift and ocean floors is very important to evolution because it gets rid of an embarrassing problem because there is not enough ocean sediments. As a creationist, I have no problem with that. The oceans are not billions of years old. That's why the sediment's not very thick.
Thank you. Dr. Richardson?
Well, I can account for an absence of sediments in the ocean by the theory of continental drift.
Which is?
Which is that the continents float on tectonic plates, and that the continent of North America is drifting closer to the continent of Asia. The Atlantic Ocean is spreading. We see seafloor spreading in the Atlantic Ocean. Seafloor spreading is accompanied by volcanic activity, things we can just go down and look at. It's not real elaborate bouncing satellites or anything. We just measure distances. And we see seafloor spreading in the Atlantic Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is considered much more ancient. It's the ocean that surrounded Pangaea 200 million years ago when the continents formed the supercontinent. And the Pacific Ocean is shrinking as we drift closer to Asia. This used to be scary before we made up with Russia. The thought that we were drifting towards Russia every year was scary to some people, but now we don't have a problem with that.
Okay. The next one for you, then, I believe you're first on this round. If biologists believe in natural selection, why do they fight to preserve endangered species that cannot survive on their own? Does this lead to some moral obligation to the environment? Where does this come from? Would you like that repeated?
Biologists are not divorced from ethics. So recognizing natural selection, which Dr. Hovind has acknowledged as a mechanism of change on Earth, is not unique to biologists. Apparently the creationists also accept that same mechanism. So why do we save organisms? I think primarily because we're the things that we feel some sense of responsibility. The rates of extinction since humans became the dominant life form on Earth have increased tremendously. And we feel some sense of responsibility for the loss of species that we are causing directly. To say that we feel that natural selection is an important mechanism leading to changes in life forms is not to say that we want organisms to become extinct. We still feel that that diversity is an important component of Earth.
Very good. Would you read that question one more time, please? My brain leaks a little bit. And
It is getting a little bit late. I think I will start to be a little bit selective here, and maybe we can wind up in a few minutes.
Sure.
If biologists believe in natural selection, why do they fight to preserve endangered species that cannot survive on their own? Does this lead to some moral obligation to the environment? Where does this come from?
Well, without getting into a whole big new discussion, I would say it comes from the innate desire in man to have something to worship, and those without a God, they're worshiping nature. To them, God becomes the trees, the nature, the rocks, the minerals. So it's a pantheist form of worship that I'm definitely for. Environmental protection. I think we go overboard in some areas. We get extreme environmentalism, which I'm definitely against. But I think we should. God never gave man the commandment to destroy the planet. He told us to cultivate it and use it. And we're to use it. Nothing wrong with cutting trees down. They're a crop like corn. Nobody gets upset about cutting corn down every year. And so I think environmentalism is valuable. I think it goes overboard. And I think many evolutionists are involved in environmentalism as kind of a salve on the conscience for the fact that they don't have the right God to worship.
Again, we have 3 or 4 that are similar, so I'm going to try to question them. And I believe this is directed only at Dr. Hovind because it has to do with the handout that he gave out at the beginning. How are the theories of humanism, racism, pornography, and women's lib, etc., connected to evolution as is suggested in the handout given at the door? Question number 6.
All right. Well, let me get to that one. The idea that there is no supreme being, that man is the God of this universe, that we make our own decisions based on what we feel is right and wrong as a human species, the idea that there is no supreme being to be accounted to, has given rise to numbers of offshoot religions. Hitler certainly used evolution to justify his genocide and racism. I have Hitler's list. He had the Jews at the bottom as more ape-like. They hadn't evolved as far. The blacks were next. Hitler hated the blacks. He walked out of the Olympics in 1936 when Jesse Owens won the Olympics, a black man. Racism can certainly be traced to the philosophy that different races of people are superior to other races. Whereas in Christianity, in the Bible, it teaches all nations are of one blood. Acts chapter 17 teaches that very plainly, certainly against racism. Let's see, what you wanted? Communism. Karl Marx, of course, after Darwin's book came out, just rejoiced and said, this is perfect to justify my theories of communism. Karl Marx tried to dedicate his book, Das Kapital, to Charles Darwin. Marx knew full well the importance of evolution on communism, and without evolution, communism would collapse. They have to have evolution to support their theory, their economic theories and political theories of communism. As far as how it ties in with abortion, the ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Back to the same question. Is the baby human at the moment of conception? It has 46 chromosomes. It is going to develop into a human without intervention. Would we be upset if a woman killed her baby 6 weeks after it was born? After all, it's her life, it's her body. Doesn't she have choice anymore if it's going to interfere with her lifestyle? Somebody's not thinking on this argument. As far as socialism, the idea that it's man's duty to take from the rich and give to the poor, the Robin Hood philosophy, everybody should work together and we should make people contribute to those who do not work or will not work or cannot work. Socialism ties right in with many of the philosophers of the 1800s who were avid evolutionists, including many in the United States. Which other ones did they ask about on there? Women's lib?
Blah, 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 blah. We talk about, oh dear, where is it here?
Well, that's okay.
Well, I'll read you a similar one also then that had to do with question number 6. No, I'm sorry, I can't really find it.
But
It had to do with there was a similar question that I cannot find right now that had something to do with why is it that well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to try to paraphrase something I can't read.
Okay.
Let me find it.
That's fine. On the women's lib issue, I would say what I'm referring to there is the type of extreme feminazis that Rush Limbaugh talks about. I certainly do not believe that man has the right to carry a club and drag his wife around by the hair, and that is certainly not taught in Scripture. The wife is my wife of nearly 20 years now, is my friend and my companion. We have a wonderful relationship. There is a difference in roles. If I was to ask which is better, a horse or a cow, you can't answer. They're different. I'm sorry. You know, one's not better than the other. Are you going to milk it or ride it? You know, there's a difference. So man and woman are different. According to Scripture, they fill different roles. And there is nothing wrong with that. And the idea of trying to make them equal, of course, physically they're not equal. I mean, ask any biologist or go visit your doctor. There is a difference, you know. In the Army, you test all the women, test all the men. The men are physically stronger. They can do more. They can carry a heavier backpack for longer. And there are emotional differences. And I love all the differences. I think it's great. It's wonderful. And God did a great job. But I'm against the extreme feminazi movement is the best way to put it. The idea of the women's lib as, in my understanding, that, and I think most women are also against it.
Since this was a question directed at Dr. Hovind, do you wish to reply?
I wish to reply to his tone, if I may.
I will ask that you be a little bit cautious and stay to the points.
Yes. My point is that, again, I keep my religion separate from my science, but that is not to call me a religious. And my family is deeply religious. We have many ministers amongst us, and I resent the implication that evolution is a godless science. Evolution is a mechanism to explain what we observe. It does not deal with our faith. It does say that we cannot accept a literal interpretation of the Bible. Very few religions today accept a literal interpretation of the Bible. I do not wish to be excluded, therefore, from religion, because I also have another part of my life that observes what I can observe and uses reason, which I believe is a very fine human gift.
Okay. You're first, I believe, Dr. Richardson. I'm going to go, I believe, through 3 more rounds, and then we'll call it an evening. Annual plants. How many years to produce a seed that will replace the parent plant? And how did the eye become? Did it evolve by a cell committee to an order that effectively sees? I believe these are challenges to some things that may have been said earlier.
Annual plants.
How many years to produce a seed that will replace the parent plant, according to evolution?
An annual plant is a plant that reproduces annually. It produces many seeds on each parent. Those seeds replace the parent. I don't quite know beyond that what the significance of replacing the parent is.
Okay,
Genetically, each seed receives half of the parent's genotype, so 2 seeds equals the genotype of the parents.
So you're saying 1 generation?
Sure.
Okay.
If you have 100 seeds, you more than replace yourself. So.
Okay, well, the second half of that, how did the I become? Let me phrase that. How did the capital I, capital become? Evolved by a cell committee to an order that effectively, capital, sees. I'm trying to reproduce the what I think is the tone of the people's questions. Right, but it's in capitals. How do we get an eyeball that can see? If you don't want to handle this, I've given this lecture many times. I'll be glad to. It takes an hour, and I have 15 slides.
If you'd like to address the evolution of the eye, I'd be happy to let you in.
I'm sorry, I was unfairly being facetious. Dr. Holman.
I saw this question on the handout, so I know that it's a nice question to pass up here, apparently. But
excuse me, Dr. Holman, your turn.
Well, I would say it's obvious the eye could not evolve. It had to be created. It's too complex. There's just too much there. Charles Darwin himself said the thing that caused him to shudder was the human eye. He said, I see no way it could evolve bit by bit. What good is a 5% eyeball? If it doesn't work yet, it's of no value. It's a hindrance. Just like a reptile's limb evolving into a bird's wing, it becomes a useless leg a long time before it becomes a useful wing. And the critter gets killed because he can't run as fast, so evolution stops dead in its tracks. It doesn't work. Most things don't work bit by bit. Tires on your vehicle don't work one at a time. They all four have to be there for it to roll. And the human eye, with its billions of complex parts, it had to be created and designed just like a computer program. You can spill Coke in your keyboard and you will not develop a computer program. Random chance produces chaos, disasters. It never produces more order, and the human eye is so ordered that makes me marvel at the intelligent creator. I have no problem with that. And I want to apologize as far as the tone. I certainly don't want to be offensive. I want to... This is a serious subject, extremely serious, because your behavior is determined by your beliefs. And we are watching a rapid decline in American culture and morals, I think, largely due to the teaching of evolution. I'm dead set against it.
Okay, I'm going to read one that, and then paraphrase a little bit, three others that I have in my hand here that ask similar questions. The theory of evolution is based on interpretation of physical evidence, while the creation theory seems to be based on attacking unanswered or controversial issues of evolution. What concrete physical evidence support creation science? A similar question made a comment that the Bible theory just doesn't cut it. And a series of questions also have to do with how do you reconcile what you're saying with the literal description of creation in Genesis. There are a number here that have to do where the dinosaurs created on the fifth day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
We need about 6 more hours on that one. As far as the physical evidence for creation, again, we're talking evidences, not proofs. If I could demonstrate the world was not billions of years old, because the Earth is slowing down 1,000th of a second per day. Every 2.5 years, we have leap second. Read Astronomy Magazine, June 30th, 1992. We had leap second. The Earth is slowing down. Well, that means that it used to be spinning faster, obviously. And if you go backwards in time, only 10 million years, the Earth was spinning too fast for life to be here because the winds were 5,000 miles an hour from the Coriolis effect. And if you want to tell me the dinosaurs lived 70 million years ago, well, then we got a real problem because they'd have been blown off the surface of the Earth. Just by the rotational velocity is decreasing. The sun is shrinking. The moon is getting further away. The Earth is cooling down. Jupiter, Saturn are all cooling down. I could go for days on physical evidences that the Earth isn't billions of years old, which, of course, does not prove creation, but it takes away the option of evolution. What evolution has done in the schools in the last 15 or 20 years in the textbooks, and I had lunch yesterday with a school board member in my county, and I'm very active in trying to get evolution out of the textbooks on the grounds that it is just a religion. I don't think they should teach evolution or creation in the textbooks. But what the evolutionists have done is they've used a very faulty logic. They're saying, well, we don't know for sure how it happened, but this is the best option. That's like saying if a person is accused of a crime, he's brought to court, and he can prove an alibi. Judge, I didn't do that crime. I wasn't there. The judge says, well, okay, but you're still guilty until you prove who did it. The innocent party doesn't have to prove who did the crime. He just has to prove he didn't do it. And proving evolution did not happen and cannot happen and does not happen is sufficient. I don't need to be able to prove creation. It is easy to disprove evolution, and that's the real problem is the subject of origins cannot be discussed without religious implications.
Okay, I believe the question is more, what is the evidence other than the Bible?
The evidence
Not against evolution,
Okay.
but for creation.
the evidence for creation is the complexity of life. It doesn't arise by chance. If an explosion in a print factory does not produce a book, it's too complex, and a random variation and chance will never produce anything like we see the complexity of life. So the example of the watch. I've never been to Japan. I've not seen the Japanese watchmakers, but there's one over there someplace. Here, it's too complex to have arisen by chance, and everything in biology is too complex to have arisen by chance. One paramecium is more complicated than the space shuttle, by far. To say it evolved is to greatly oversimplify the complexity of all biology that we understand. So I would have to stand and say, hey, here's the watch. There has to be a watchmaker, though I've never seen him. I would say, here's the creation. There had to be a creator. That's just that simple. I agree. That's going into the metaphysical. I've not seen him. I've not touched him. So
Okay, I'm going to follow that up then with the last of the questions, and again, this is more directed toward you.
Okay.
And we have a number here that ask the same thing, that have to do with the complexity of the human, as you just discussed and all. How does that rule out that, in effect, evolution is the mechanism by which God has created us? Yes.
That again would go back to who do you think God is? What kind of God are you worshiping? Is it a God of random chance that doesn't know what he wants, or is it a God that knows what he wants? I'm sure the people in Japan did not throw the pieces in a dryer and let them clang around for 1,000 years and hope it developed a Casio Databank watch. I think they had a design in mind when they went into it. And there's obvious design in the body, obvious design in everything in nature, and that speaks loudly of a very intelligent designer. Did I get off the question? Was the one about the Bible and where the dinosaurs fit in, or is that different? That was on that question too, wasn't it?
That was on an earlier round, I believe.
It was on the first half of that question.
The summary of all of these is I think comes back to a question we asked earlier that I tried to summarize. Is it possible that evolution is the mechanism God uses?
I would say it is not possible that evolution is the mechanism God uses. By evolution, we need to carefully define the term. If there are two very different things that are classed under the term of evolution. There is simple variation. Dogs developing new varieties of dogs, and they will say, hey, that's evolution. No. That's variation. That happens. Florida rabbits cannot breed with Alaska rabbits. They have delineated the species, and they are no longer interfertile. They can't produce a viable offspring. Alaska rabbits can breed with Iowa rabbits, and Iowa rabbits can breed with Florida rabbits, but the two extremes cannot. They have diversified. I understand all that. But that's not evolution. That's variation. They're still rabbits. It didn't change into a hamster or anything else. It's still a rabbit. So that's not evolution. There is no evidence for evolution ever having occurred unless you want to take evidences for variation. So what they do, some people call that microevolution and then macroevolution. The same phenomena could be observed with the weather. We have our daily weather patterns due to a number of forces, but our yearly weather patterns are due to other forces, solar forces outside of this Earth, not related to the heating and cooling. Two totally separate set of events that cause the weather patterns. And we have microevolution, variation, which is God ordained. He created the species with a genetic code that's very complex. My 3 kids are all very different. That's proof of creation. You can buy cars with a variety of options. That's proof of creation. Somebody
Okay,
designed it.
Dr. Richardson, is it possible to you that evolution is the mechanism that God has used for creating the human?
Yes.
Okay. Is that all you wish to say?
I would like to say that that I noticed that microevolution is now acceptable, and microevolution is just evolution at a smaller scale. If we accept microevolution, again, remember that the mechanism of evolution is one mechanism of evolution is natural selection. Other mechanisms of evolution are genetic drift, other genetic mechanisms. If we accept microevolution, if we accept the mechanism of evolution of natural selection, and then it is not a conceptual leap to go from that to macroevolution, or the evolution of types.
Okay, I'm going to finish up with a question that I certainly hope was written facetiously. Please don't answer this. Or maybe you can if you wish. To the evolutionist. The National Enquirer at the grocery store regularly shows a half dog plus half humans and other half and half species. Is this part of your empirical proof that proves evolution? Do you wish to discuss the National Enquirer? If you don't, we can call it an evening, unless Dr. Hovland wishes to discuss the National Enquirer.
The National Enquirer is an important part of many biology general examinations. So,
those of you that have her in a class, remember that.
I don't think I've ever read a National Enquirer. I certainly don't learn any, or study that at all, or that kind of stuff. No, that kind of stuff. But it is a good point. There are no intermediates today. That any breeder, any cattle breeder or dog breeder will tell you there are limits to the genetic drift, and the further you get from the norm, the more problems you develop. So yeah, Christians and creationists, maybe the two aren't the same, but the creationists don't question genetic drift, but there are limits to it. We don't question variation, but there are limits. For years they've been trying to breed faster horses. Why doesn't somebody breed wings onto one? They'd certainly be faster then. You're never going to do it. There are limits to that. It cannot be done. And so what has happened is taking microevolution and interpreting that to prove macroevolution is a gigantic leap of faith.
We hope you've enjoyed watching this debate on the topic of creation evolution. This is not just an academic subject. If the creation story is right and God created this world, then we better do what God says. And if you're watching this tape and you're not a Christian, God loves you. He wants you to come to heaven. But He hates your sin. He hates my sin. He won't tolerate any sin in heaven. Since He created the world and He designed it and He owns it, He makes the rules. And His rule is no sin in heaven. Well, we're all sinners, which means we all deserve to go to hell. But Jesus Christ, God Himself in the flesh, died on the cross to pay for your sins and my sins. On February 9th, 1969, I prayed and said, Lord, I'm a sinner. Would you please forgive me and save me? And on that day, I got born again into God's family. You can be born again. All you need to do is admit you're a sinner. Admit that you deserve to go to hell. Call upon Jesus Christ to forgive you and save you. He's the only one who can, and He wants to so badly if you'll just ask Him. If you're not sure you're going to heaven, ask the Lord to save you right now. You could just pray a simple prayer like I prayed back in 1969. I just said, Lord, I'm a sinner. Would you please forgive me and save me right now? If you do that, today will be your spiritual birthday. The Bible says you must be born again in John chapter 3. In John chapter 1, it says you get born again, you become a son of God by receiving Him. When you receive Jesus Christ, you receive His gift that He died on the cross for you, and you receive that for your sins. That's the day you get born into God's family. You become God's child. We have lots of material in our ministry designed to help strengthen your faith in the Word of God and help you grow as a Christian. If you'd like to call or write our office, we'd be glad to send you a catalog. You can get on our website and get lots of information. If you'd like to schedule a debate, I'd be honored to come. Just get my itinerary off my website and find out when I will be in your area. And I'll be glad to come speak at a college, speak at a university, speak at a debate, represent the creation side against as many professors as want to get together. We'll take on 10 at a time. That doesn't matter. You see, God's right and evolution is wrong. It's pretty simple. Thank you so much. Please don't hesitate to call us if we can be any help.